Good afternoon. On behalf of Department of English, MSCB University, Kyonja campus, I welcome our audience to this special online lecture titled Translation and Knowledge Making Impact of Translation on Literary Polysystems and Cultural Ecology. We are honored to have as our esteemed speaker for today's lecture Saswati Saha of Sikkim University. She's currently working as assistant professor in the Department of English, Sikkim University. She's also been a doctoral fellow or PhD scholar at the Center for Study in Social Sciences, Calcutta, CSSC, where she wrote her thesis on a very important subject, and it was titled English Literary Travelogues in Bengali, a study of social reformation, translation, and assimilation. She has also been an Indian Council of Social Sciences Research ICSSR fellow at CSSC. Uh, Before she joined Sikkim University, she wrote an MPhil at CSSC, which was titled "Translating Primers: The Politics of Knowledge Making in 19th Century Bengal." She has been a recipient of a good number of fellowships, including the Charles Wallace India Trust Award for Short-Term Research in the UK. This was in 2019. She also received a scholarship from the Institute of Collaborative Research in Humanities from the Queen's University, Belfast, Ireland, to attend the Institute of Irish Studies International Summer School back in 2014. She also received a travel grant by the American Comparative Literature Association, ACLA, to attend the ACLA annual meeting 2018 at University of California, Los Angeles, and she also received the IATIS bursary to attend the 7th International Association for Translation and Intercultural Studies Conference, which is due to take place later this year at Barcelona, Spain. I welcome Saswati to make her presentation. After the talk, we'll take questions from our audience. Over to Saswati. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shashwat. First of all, I would like to thank the Department of English, MSCB University, Kyonjar campus, for inviting me to deliver a lecture. I truly feel extremely honored. Especially thanks to Shashwat for being so kind and having me here today. I hope I do justice to such an honor. So the title of my talk today is Translation and Knowledge Making, Impact of Translation on Literary Polysystem and Cultural Ecology. Here I'll be actually talking about the translation of pedagogical texts and how it creates an impact on the literary culture, existing literary culture of indigenous, especially in the context of 19th century Bengal, 19th century and early 20th century Bengal, and see how translation functions and impacts in the literary polysystem of an indigenous culture. Let's begin, and I will discuss in the course of the presentation. Translation became a tool of knowledge making ever since the advent of the British in India. The practice of translating textbooks into indigenous languages began as a part of the British policy of spreading Western thoughts and ideas among the larger population using vernacular as the medium. Although the Minute of 1835 made English the medium of instruction, vernaculars were not completely disregarded. Lord Auckland's Minute of November 1839 declared that vernacular instruction was to be combined with English, full choice being allowed to pupils to attend whichever institution or medium of instruction they would prefer individually. But the government made it a point that even if the medium of instruction was in the vernaculars, the natives, quote unquote natives, must be taught Western scientific and logical thinking in classrooms. This required translations of textbooks that were so far used in the English school into the vernaculars. These translations became indispensable with Wood's dispatch of 1854. Sir Charles Wood declared that in India, the British had to deal with a race of people, and I'm quoting from Wood's dispatch, a race of people slow to change, bound up by religious prejudices and antiquated customs, unquote. Therefore, certain changes had to be made in the British approach to education in India. Uh, Although art, science, and philosophy of Europe were to be diffused through education, English as a medium need not be insisted upon at all stages. The dispatch gave importance to the existing vernacular languages because it was through the medium of the vernaculars that European language could filter down to the masses. The next dispatch was that of 1859, known as the Stanley's Dispatch. Uh, so this dispatch desired to review the educational policy existing in India and the orders dispatched from the country since 1894. Stanley's dispatch clearly outlines the major objective by stating, and I'm quoting, at the same time, and as the importance of vernacular language becomes more appreciated, the vernacular literature of India will be enriched by translation of European books or by the original composition of men whose minds have been imbued with the spirit of European advancement, so that European knowledge may be gradually placed in this manner within the reach of all classes of people. We look therefore to the English languages and the vernacular languages of India together as the media for the diffusion of European knowledge, and it is our desire to see them cultivated together in all schools in India of a sufficiently high class to maintain a schoolmaster possessing the requisite qualifications. So basically, what they desired is that vernacular teaching should continue along with teaching in English, and they would require a qualified master to teach or to disseminate that kind of knowledge. But whatever will be taught in the vernaculars will be exactly what the European Enlightenment philosophy brought to India. So therefore, translation became inevitable as a part of this, pedagogical practice. Thus, textbooks and primers began to be translated from the English ones that were already used in the English and Anglo vernacular schools under government supervision. Lists were made by the government as to which books need to be translated for the students who approach education through the medium of their mother tongue, like C.B. Clarke's History of the World and Lethbridge's History and Geography of Bengal. Competitions were held on the translations of these books, and awards were announced to encourage more and more participation from among the indigenous population. British education policy makers and authors of primers like Mr. Lethbridge suggested that, and I'm quoting, a notification should be put forth that such and such book or translation is wanted, inviting applications from qualified authors and stating that from among the applicants, the local committee would choose a small number, say two or three of the authors of highest repute, and that the government would pay the cost of printing and publishing a small first edition of, say, 500 copies of each of the productions of these selected authors, and that all the books so produced that might satisfy the committee would be put upon the government authorized list. Unquote. The British colonizers in India targeted the textbooks to create the desired subject, since textbooks are instructional instruments and they are designed to achieve some sort of predetermined instructional objectives. They necessarily included lessons that contain material and situations effectively designed to instill in the students some values that the government desired. The main body which regulated the production of books for children in Bengal was the Calcutta School Book Society, established in the year 1870. Later, another society came up called the Vernacular Literature Society, which was established in the year 1851, which also contributed in providing literary works fit for the young children of Bengal. These two societies mainly dealt with production, distribution, and sales of textbooks and were regarded as educational institution conducted by a committee of gentlemen associated for the purpose of providing and disseminating to the country a supply of suitable school books and school apparatuses, together with wholesome vernacular publication for general reading as a means of advancing the education of the people. While the former, that is, the Calcutta School Book Society, was established earlier and concentrated on the publication of school books, the Vernacular Literature Society was an endeavor to make a good collection of reading materials for young readers of Bengal, mainly through translations of English books that had left a mark on the international readership. The Vernacular Literature Committee was set up with the aim of providing suitable books which, apart from providing the pleasure of reading, will also have a didactic value. It believed that one of the ways in which the modern Bengali language could be enriched was through translation. The translation of renowned English texts into Bengali. Now, in today's talk, because I cannot deal with all sorts of pedagogical texts because they can be actually categorized into multiple sections, I will choose writings on travel, specifically travel to the foreign lands and their translations into Bengali in the 19th century. Uh, I'm not talking about translations of travel narratives, but translations of writings on travel. Um, so, you see, undertaking sea voyages was not sanctioned by Hindu religion. The Brahmanical tradition considered traveling across sea, which was called Kalapani or black water in the Indo-Aryan languages. It was prohibited as it resulted, according to their belief, in pollution and sin because of exposure to alien people, their culture, and food habits. Going abroad therefore meant defying the caste laws, and hence crossing the black water often led to excommunication. Shimonti Sen, in her book Travel to Europe, Self and Other in Bengali Travel Narratives, 1870 to 1910, mentions that in ancient India, the idea of travel or Brahman was associated with the idea of aimless wandering or disoriented roaming, as the Sanskrit word for travel, Brahman, finds its root in the word bhrom, meaning a mistake or an error, often an illusion also. A person who had to leave his home and wander around was either considered to be one who is exiled or is experiencing the curse of banishment. The domestic responsibility or the Shamshar Dharma of a man weighed much more than satisfying their desire to roam. This was the common or the layman understanding of the scriptural interpretation of travel in the then Bengal. As a result, in the 19th century, whoever traveled abroad uh, faced dire consequences on their return. Not only were their families excommunicated, the returnee was supposed to undergo a process of prayashchitta or purification to become fit to live in the society once again. So, in such an environment, in such a a cultural milieu, uh, no, writings on travel actually had a what I want to argue had a huge impact on the way people were thinking, impacted the cultural ecology as such, made people think about travel in a very different way, and how let's see if we can figure that out a little bit. Um, so there exists a huge body of literature that was produced to discuss the concept of travel. Importance of its experience, and to imbue common public with the desire for travel and make them realize its importance. So there were writings in the first half of the 19th century. They were mainly translations of geography books that kind of introduced the common reading public with the larger world in general, introduced him to the various nooks and corners of the world, the physical features that were to be found there. Um, then gradually came in translations of literary travelogues, fictional works on travel, and then works on travel like Bacon's of Travel and other non-fictional texts. Gradually, the consciousness, the sense, people were sensitized about how travel was becoming important in this new modern world, how it is important to enter into this network of commerce and trade, which was associated with travel. Gradually, even the indigenous population began to write a lot of works. They began debating with the scriptures. They brought out pamphlets that kind of debated with the existing belief in the society. Uh, and gradually, the Hindu sea voyage movement was launched in the last 2 decades of the 19th century. And of course, there was a lot of changes that was happening in the minds of the people regarding travel. The mentality was gradually undergoing change. So I would look at some of such translations and how they impacted on the readership, on the reading population. The pedagogical instruction that these travel and adventure books tried to infuse shows how translation can impact the cultural ecology prevailing in the indigenous culture and also the literary polysystem by introducing genres of literature that never existed before. Veena Narigal, in her book Language Politics, Elites and the Public Sphere, Western India Under Colonialism, writes, and I'm quoting from her text, on its own admission, education policy represented nothing less than a desire to restructure native ways of thinking, especially the way colonial subjects would receive and interact with state power. Unquote. For this to happen, the existing culture needed to be altered in a significant way or given a jolt in the list. One of the intentions of colonial pedagogy was certainly to impact upon the existing ideology of the colonized and to introduce topics so as to attack the existing conventional notions. It is through translation that an idea that did not exist in society was brought in to start them from within. Since existing culture needed to be altered in a significant way or given a push in the list, the sea voyages that were prohibited were brought into discussion for reconsideration. The books, therefore, served as, as the harbinger of the forthcoming movement and writings of many more literary travelogues that enriched the Bengali literary tradition. However, this was achieved not just by the British, but there was a larger involvement of the indigenous intellectuals who were in favor of revolutionizing the existing thought patterns that were preventing the progress of the society as a whole. With the advent of the British, the colonized subject of Bengal started realizing the importance of knowing the world. A group of elite indigenous intellectuals began to realize that the gains of sea voyage outweighed the losses and began a movement to counter the arguments of the social conservatives, mainly upheld by the Brahmins. The modern economic compulsions demanded a new form of mobility, and hence traveling as an autonomous cultural activity gained ground with the support from the colonial rulers and their pedagogic policy. I will take up two texts that were introduced or by the Vernacular Literature Society. Uh, One is a non-fictional text, which is loosely based on translation of Bacon's Of Travel, which was not, which was published by the uh, literary magazine that was published under the Vernacular Literature Committee, called Vividharto Shangraha, which was edited by Rajendra Lal Mitra. The other one is the translation of Robinson Crusoe. Uh, so both non-fiction and fictional works on travel and adventure brought to them the consciousness of the importance of sea voyage movement. The fictional works brought with them figure of a heroic traveler adventurer who could dominate the sea and reach the unknown corners of the world. See, Robinson Crusoe were of course not travel narrative, was not a travel narrative, right? But followed the framework of a traveler and created a world of romantic travel and adventure across the sea, which was missing in the Bengali literature until that time. What appealed to the Bengali leadership was the romance, the adventure, and the freedom to roam the world, which was restricted to them by religious scriptures. They were answering an expectation and desire for adventure and engaging the world outside the boundary of the country. The foreign and the fantastic merged to create a fascinating tale of travel and adventure, which appealed to the wish and desire of the common Bengali men and women. Travel became a part of the pedagogical discussion in Bengal with the publication of an article called Desh Promo, or Traveling to Places, which was published in the year 1852. It was published in the first volume of Vividharto Shangraha, the Journal of the Vernacular Literature Committee, edited by Rajendra Mitra. It was one of the earliest attempts of explaining the benefits of travel abroad and thereby a remark against the social restrictions on crossing sea or black waters and that prevented Bengalis from undertaking sea voyages. It is the first of its kind that brought the discussion on travel to a platform of mass consumption so as to invite more discussions on the topic in the near future. It is one of the earliest examples that argued in favor of travel, debunking the Hindu social and religious myths. The article is loosely based on Bacon's of Travel, in which the anonymous author writes that one of the ways in which mankind has been able to learn is through close observation while traveling. Therefore, whoever desires knowledge must travel. The author refers to the concept of the grand tour practiced in England among the upper classes and says that their young students on completion of their education embark upon travel to various countries and thus gain knowledge. As a result, eminent geographers, naturalists have emerged from England who have seen this vast art and know it like the back of their hands. As against England, that has encouraged travel and created a body of knowledge based on it, India had been hopeless in this field. The author takes a dig at the immorality of the Indians and writes, and here I'm translating from the Bengali text, and I'm quoting. But it is extremely sad that people of other countries have always remained like a frog in a well without the practice of traveling. And that is why they have become so deplorable that describing it will only result in lament and repentance. Unquote. The article deals with the idea of travel the way Europe had recognized it and considered inclusion of it as a part of education. Traveling as a part of education stems from the fact that humankind, this author writes, is a blank slate that learns from experience. Hence, traveling becomes desirable for the development of mind and gaining knowledge. Just reading about places was not enough. Real empirical knowledge required actual visits to those places. As such, the intellectuals of the 19th century Bengal were attempting a naturalization of the concept of travel and associating it with education following the concept of the grand tour in Europe, which became an integral part of education and mandatory for those who could travel, who could afford to travel. The tours were, of course, we know, meant to enrich the taste of young men about art and make them aware of history and cultivate among them a grace to appreciate the finer things in life. So there was this desire to inculcate the same ideas among the contemporary population. Um, Apart from this very significant publication, which came out in the journal, the committee actually published a full and kind of very faithful translation of Robinson Crusoe as Robinson Crusoe Jibun Chorito, which was translated by J. Robinson in the year, again, the same year, 1852. The reason why Vernacular Literature Society considered Robinson Crusoe as a text suitable for pedagogical purpose is because the individualism and independence of a man left alone on an island for many years was thought of to be of immense educational value to the readers. Moreover, it excites the curiosity of the mind and engages the readers powerfully in descriptions of arising situations with which Crusoe had to deal. The European Enlightenment educationists believed that the most effective way of teaching children is by setting examples before them. Instances of lives of ideal men, therefore, would provide them with opportunities to see them act in a certain way when faced with certain circumstances and challenges, which would help them to act like them in future. So, Robinson Crusoe, in spite of being a fictional character, was considered of the same value, which could actually instill some ideals in the characters of the students. Uh, Robinson Crusoe Jibun Chorito, or the story of the life of Robinson Crusoe, therefore had a didactic note as the story traces the development of a man from being radically dismissive of societal control to a man who has now attained wisdom to reflect on the decisions he had made from a more rational position. It is through his experience as a traveler that he learns. Crusoe himself regards his life as a journey of learning. The translation became very popular in colonial Bengal. In the report of 1857 of the committee, it was mentioned that Robinson Crusoe had the largest circulation of all the society's translations. The second edition of the text appeared in 1857. The committee members were extremely hopeful about its popularity and sale. The report says, and I'm quoting, "It will probably be sold rapidly as the price has been fixed at a very low sum. It is feared that this low price, which is 6 annas per copy, cannot be maintained in future editions." Unquote. Both the first and the second editions had 1,000 copies printed. After the printing of the second edition, 485 copies were sold in the first year and 305 copies were sold in the second year. The report of the year 1859 says that the third edition was already in press. The third edition appeared in 1860 with another 1,000 copies. So it remained quite a popular text till quite some time, at least until 1862. It kept on being published, and the 1861 at least the committee sold copies, not much, but at least around 150 copies. The popularity of the translation shows how the Crusoe motif resonated with the 19th century and early 20th century reading public, fostering the Bengali reader's love for the strange and the desire to encounter the unknown that lies beyond the known periphery of their own dish or land. Uh, the survival of Crusoe on a deserted island where he had to live by his wits, was not just thrilling for the Bengali readers, but it educated them with lessons from the life of a hero who became the agent of his own survival. Crusoe had the agency of his life in his own hands, something which was largely missing among the Bengalis who had layers of hierarchy dominating them, be it their family or religious beliefs which imposed restrictions on them. Now, the adventure of Crusoe remained equally popular throughout the century and also in the as the new century began, the 20th century began, we can see another translation coming. This was, however, not by the Vernacular Literature Committee, which seems to exist by then, like in the next decade itself. But this was an independent translation by Charu Chandra Bandyopadhyay, a prominent science teacher in colonial Bengal, who was also known for writing scientific articles and fiction for children. He translated Robinson Crusoe as Robinson Crusoe in the year 1910, which was published by Indian Publishing House. In the preface of the book, Charuchandra mentions that this story of Defoe was based on a Scottish castaway, Alexander Selkirk, and Defoe based his novel on his life. Providing a real basis for the character was an important step taken towards making the account more believable. So it's no more a fiction now. Although the character is Crusoe might be fictional, but it is based on a real life. So there were people who actually had such a life, such a eventful life. Therefore, the life of Robinson Crusoe no more remains an impossible tale of a fictional navigator, but becomes a living possibility for anyone who takes to the sea. Charuchandra further writes in the preface that, and I'm just quoting, these are my translations. Just as the account of Crusoe is filled with extremely surprising and intriguing events, it is equally educative. This is why this book is so admired in England. Unquote. He says that this book can ignite imagination of the children, and further maintains that this text relating to the life of a famous navigator and his strong determination to overcome obstacles will provide the best food for the imagination of an average Bengali boy, for there was not many examples around him to enable him to think beyond the realms of his immediate surrounding. Charuchandra's text varies from other translations of Robinson Crusoe, not just because it is simpler and aims at catering to the needs of the children, but also because the stress is more on the traveler Robinson Crusoe. Hence, the story does not end with the adventure with his adventure in the island, but carries on to a second part. So the first part is called the Prothomartho or the first half, but the book has an Uttorardho or the later half, which begins at Crusoe's mature age, long after he had returned from his island. This part of the book is a translation based on the sequel that Defoe wrote in the year 1719, which was titled The Further Adventure of Robinson Crusoe, being the second and last part of his life and of the strange, surprising accounts of his travels round three parts of the globe. Taking the narrative beyond the adventure of the island, Charuchandra's translation tries to trace the entire life of a traveling hero whom even age and maturity could not tame within domestic life. In this translation of the later half, Crusoe says that he could not stay peacefully at home for long because, and I'm quoting from the text, the craze for travel had become ingrained in me. The world is my home, the humanity my friend and relation. Unquote. This brings out the essential traveler in Crusoe, who has made the world his home and hence never felt the affection for home. It is with the larger world of travel and adventure that he feels connected with. Charachandra seemed mesmerized by the character of a dedicated traveler like Crusoe. He is so enamored by his free traveling spirit that he spends quite some time to describe it in detail in the first few chapters. The protagonist calls him Bhaboghure or wanderer because neither did he want to earn money for he had enough, nor he had any interest in visiting new places as he had already seen many. But traveling and being on the move is his addiction. He missed his traveling days so much that even in his dreams he kept talking about experience of those days. He understood that his life of voyage is calling him once again, and there's this small poem. I couldn't translate the entire of it, but a small section was something like, I was addicted to the road was calling me. He had to answer this call because he cannot survive without the pleasure of moving constantly and the anxiety and curiosity attached with traveling to unknown places. He says, and I'm quoting from the text, the pleasure of advancing every day, the everlasting curiosity of the outer world, the mind is eager at every step for the unknown. Crusoe makes a distinction between himself and other more settled common people on earth for work to live, who work to live and live to work. They eat to live and live to eat. They all work hard, but no one finds peace the way Crusoe does. Crusoe's character here becomes a celebration of a free spirited individual for whose life every common man yearns, but being ensnared by the domestic responsibilities cannot achieve. After this, another abridged version of Robinson Crusoe was published by Keshav Chandra Chaudhary. The translator's name is not revealed or it's not available. This was published by the City Book Society of Calcutta in 1913. The name, neither any note or any preface survives to talk about the methodology of translation. The book consists of illustrations, and the huge volume of Defoe's work is reduced to just 52 pages, clearly meant for children. Um, the book reads more like a rapid reader, um, and was obviously directed towards children who would not grasp the intricate details of Crusoe's complex thought processes and gradual mental transformation. The tale is of an adventure hero whose life comprises of rapid series of events. The abridged translation cuts out most of what came before or after Crusoe's experience on the island to present Crusoe as a hero who could survive a solitary life in a hostile environment through individual ingenuity. It therefore became an entertaining and thrilling tale of struggle of a mariner's life, threatening storms at sea, devastating shipwrecks, barbaric captives, hostile people, and natural environment, and experience of exploration of an unknown world. Now, the three translations that I talked about show that with time, the approach towards the text and the method of translation undergoes changes. Whereas the first one, that is by J. Robinson in the year 1852, uh, was very faithful. It attempted to remain as close to the source text as possible. However, the later translators, as we see in Charuchandra, started taking their liberty and provided an entertaining literary travelogue to their readers. Gradually, the translations became a brief storybooks for young children. The model of the story and its depiction of an energetic and ingenious hero, however, was not lost. Some of the aspects of this, which these translations brought with them and popularized among the Bengali readership, are thrills of travel and adventure, undertaking toilsome sea voyages, survival strategies, having agency of their own, easily shifting to a non-familiar space that could even threaten their existence. All of this, things that were not there in the Bengali literary culture before. These aspects were now channelized, adapted, and explored in the original Bengali adventure novels, which began to be written in abundance in the late 19th and early 20th century. As such, translations were now affecting the Bengali literary polysystem. According to Itamar Ibn Zohar, translation, which is otherwise regarded secondary in the literary system, can attain a central position depending on three situations. Number one, when a polysystem has not yet been crystallized, that is to say, when a literature is young and in the process of being established. Two, when a literature is either peripheral uh, or weak or both. And number three, when there are turning points, crisis, or literary vacuums in a literature. These three social circumstances, especially when a literature is young or weak, facilitate translation to take the primary position and therefore helps in experimenting with the new genre because the original writing in young and or weak literature cannot fulfill the requirement to create all forms and genres. So the inability to produce all kinds of writings in the original makes the young literature to depend heavily on translation from dominant languages. In such scenario, translation will not only hold the primary position but will also be considered supposedly the quote unquote original. Edwin Gensler argued, and I'm quoting, translated texts serve not only as a medium through which new ideas can be imported, but also as the form of writing most frequently imitated by creative writers in the native language. Unquote. But then, with slowly changing conditions, the power dynamics between translation and the original changes its place, and the original, resulting from the translation, emerges to hold the central position, while the translations are relegated to the peripheral position in the literary polysystem. The change in the hierarchy of the position between the translation and the original can be taken as a proof of increase in number as well as quality of new original writings in the receiving language. This change in the position happens because translation brings in a whole new set of literary genres previously non existent and thereafter motivates the writers of the target language to conduct experiment with newly imported genres and themes. By bringing in this polysystem theory, I do not intend to mean that Bengali literature is weak or young to the English literary tradition by any means. Okay. But the unavailability of certain genres of literature made the Bengali literary tradition receptive to certain British literary types. For instance, the novel as a genre, as we all know, entered Bengali literature after its arrival in India through the British. Various subtypes of novels, be it based on travel writing, detective fiction, romance, came to be modeled along the lines of the European literature. Hence, here Bengali literature becomes younger to the English literary tradition in the context of these genres and in the context of the literary policies. The original adventure novels that were written in the early 20th century in Bengali followed the model of the Western literary travelogues and pursued an arduous journey by a hero who is smart and courageous and is in no way inferior to the European counterparts. The Bengali adventure heroes are sketched as the replicas of the European travelers, albeit with Bengali sensibilities to make them more believable, attractive, and worthy of reception for the target readers. He puts on the shoes of his European counterpart, but with gradual maturity of the genre, he gathers characteristics of his own based on his origin and the literary conventions in which he matures. He sets out on a journey from Bengal to discover the unknown corners of the world. Such indigenous attempts reclaim the identity of a colonized who was constructed through a colonial discourse, which also involved travel and representation. It is through these literary travelers the colonized return the gaze to the world outside. These novels problematize the center periphery binary that is integral to any travel narrative because the center from which the journey began symbolized the cradle of high civilization, and travelers from here ventured to far away peripheral places. In the case of these narratives that originated in Bengal, the center from which the journey began, of course, was Bengal, and the peripheral places were often Africa. Uh, and the colonized subject translates from being the object gazed at to being the one who now gazes at the world he visits. The setting of the setting of Africa is explored in many such works like Khagendranath Mitro's Africar Jongole, Perimon Sengupta's Kafriদের Desh Africa, Hemendra Kumar Rai's Abar Jokner Don, and of course the most famous of them all, let's say most popular of them all, the Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's Chaঁদের Bahar. All of these were written during 1920s and 1930s. The construction of a homogeneous Africa is filled with racial bias, but is so elaborately described in this text, focusing on the hazardous natural environment, wildlife, and the indigenous population, that it becomes an essential other of both urban and rural Bengal. These translations from English brought into the Bengali literary arena the concept of obichan or expedition, adventure, a literary subtype that was not explored before. With the gradual popularity of this text, a demand for this type of literature was created in Bengali, which led to the rise of the original adventure narratives. The advent of the original adventure novels in Bengali gradually relegated the translations to a secondary category, which continued to survive later as mostly abridged children's storybooks. The abridged versions concentrate only on the plot with the purpose or scopos, as they call it, of catering to particular younger readers so that they do not get lost within the interstices of complex narratives, while the actual adventure were now brought to the more original adventure narratives written in Bengali. Thank you. Um, I hope Asha can hear me.
Yes, thank you so much, Saswati, for that richly insightful and engaging talk. Thank you for talking to us about topic which I think we are only familiar in limited ways. That we when we think of travel or travel narratives, we often think of what people have to say about new places, the idea of wonder or excitement. But to talk about travel narrative and look at the idea of the way of understanding the world or situating oneself within the world or the change of the uh, gaze, as it were. Uh, you've told us, and more importantly, you've tried to place it within a larger culture of translation in late 19th and early 20th century Bengal, and through your rich and dense archival research, you've also drawn, and rightly so, drawn our attention to the material cultures of translation, what, in the sense that what led to translation, what kind of translations were possible or made possible by what factors, and so on. So thank you so much for enlightening us on such an important topic. We shall now take a few questions. Is that all right, Shashwat? Can we
Yeah,
take
yeah,
the,
sure, sure, sure.
yeah, great. Right. And meanwhile, while our audience sends us a few questions, I would just like to ask one question, and this is for our students mostly. Could you tell us a little more about your research? I mean, how did you go about it, the kind of archives that you explored, and how did it take shape? Because I'm sure it must have been a very painstaking exercise having to rummage through a lot of material. So please do tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, most of these materials that I go actually, I did not go focusing on, like, looking for works on travel as such in the beginning. I was looking randomly for translated works from English into Bengali, but later on, when I was gathering more and more of this text, I actually kind of saw a pattern that kind of talked mostly about travel, because I got many translations of Robinson Crusoe, many translations of Gulliver's Travels, and they had like elaborate prefaces which talked about those works as Bhraman Kahini, travel narratives. This kind of intrigued me more. And another factor is that I was really interested in this vernacular literature committee, and I was looking at at the works that were published by this committee. I actually the Charles Wallace Fellowship that you just mentioned. I got this for my research on this committee actually, and I saw the kind of works that were coming out. I could not mention Gulliver's Travels here, but if actually in the Vividhartha Shangraha, which is the literary magazine of this committee, they also apparently attempted the first ever translation of Gulliver's Travel, which was although incomplete but did exist. The first few chapters were translated by anonymous translator. So then I kind of saw that there was this parallel rise of this movement of that was rising against these restrictions on sea voyages, and there were very interesting texts like Japan Opened and all that were translated and presented before the Bengali audience to show how important it is now to open themselves also to the larger world, the larger world of economy. And yes, and then gradually this gave way to the lot of other adventure novels that began to be written in Bangla. So, see, the thing is, archive is always marked with silence. You cannot get a complete archive, a complete picture of it. But yes, I had to rummage through a lot of that. It's very difficult. Uh, we all know when we are looking at such works, because in most of the cases, the prefaces pages are missing, and you do not get most of the informations. Even regarding the publication dates, it becomes very difficult. But yes, this visiting the British Library really helped me a lot in getting some of the very important materials. And also regarding the adventure novels which I mentioned in the last part of the talk, actually it's very difficult to fixate when exactly writing of adventure novels began, or which is the first adventure novel written in Bangla. But it just came up and I spoke to a lot of people, who do like important research in this area. Nobody could actually tell me when and how. And that and also another interesting factor about this adventure novel, is that um, there are other genres like this detective fictions and all, which will also had a lot of adventure factor within them. So you just cannot distinguish and differentiate so much. So it's difficult to fixate them at a particular point and say this is the first one and this is where it begins. But it was like a flow. It began during that time, and slowly the translations were giving way to original works. But the popularity of the translations actually show, I mean, you can understand from the fact that so many translations were happening, so many editions of the translated works were coming up, which kind of give you an idea of the reception of these texts and how much they were circulated, who were buying them. If the reports were available, you can actually find those also. I don't know if I could answer your question,
Yeah,
but
no, yeah,
archival works are like that. So you just
yes, yes, thank you. We have a question from Shikha, which says, "Thanks a lot, Saswati, for that most engaging talk. Could you please speak about knowledge texts which were written following experiences of travel, if there are
following
instances?"
real experiences of travel, right?
Yes, yes.
Uh, uh, I do not find translations of real, text, but yes, most importantly, which you can find also there you find their you say uh, impact on the adventure narratives that were being written in Bangla, where the works of the anthropologists and naturalists, like Livingstone and others. Those were mentioned even by the authors themselves. Like Vibhuti Bhushan says, that he read those works and he made his you know protagonist also read such works, and those were quite very famous in Bengal, following of course the writings on geography and and geography writing. They were called the natural sciences, books of natural sciences, of course. So all of these kind of were very famous. Like Livingstone, Stanley, Harry Johnston were read along with Marco Polo, Robinson Crusoe. So you just you cannot. They were like fused, and people were reading both the fictional works and the non-fictional works together at the same time. So yes, uh, works of Stanley, Livingstone, Johnston were very much available in Bengal at that point of time. Not in translations so much, but I didn't find translations of those works. But writings on them do exist a lot, and there were also like small books that were coming up, Bengali books, which kind of tried to shorten these lives of these adventurers, like real life adventurers, and that kind of were read as pedagogical texts also. Yes. There were such books available on lives of Livingstone, Stanley, and valorizing them as heroes. How much ever their works can be problematic now to us, but at that point of time they were seen as works of very like great importance, because how they were free to roam the world, and they were discovering new places, they were going to such nooks and corners of the world, and most of the adventure heroes were also passionate like them, later. So they were creating a huge impact on the kind of narratives that started to be written during the early 20th century. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just a couple of more questions, Shashwati. In fact, more like an observation and then one question, not related to each other, really. But one is that from what I gathered from your presentation is part of this fascination with these travel narratives is with the life of the individual, right? The fascination is with leading a certain kind of life of adventure, etc. So, which perhaps, excuse me, if I may put it this way, that there's also this idea that a travel narrative may be read as some kind of a biographical literature. So, part of
Yes.
it is that,
Yes,
right?
because
So,
you see, the title of Robinson Crusoe's first translation was Robinson Crusoe Jibon Chori. So basically, it's about the life, the biography of such a life. And I was telling you that the 18th century philosophers like Locke and Rousseau, they kind of believe that it's one of the important ways to which knowledge could be fed among young children is through setting examples of ideal men and characters. So if the early primers that were written in Bangla, like by Vidyashagar also, there were some very famous texts were Jibun Charito, Charita Boli, which were based on the biographies of scientists, important personalities, because learning through examples of ideal life was an important part of the colonial pedagogy. So yes, Robinson Crusoe, being a fictional character, it was translated, and if you look at the prefaces also, they were he was his life was seemed to have a huge didactic impact on the students, and they would learn to live life and with limited means, and how you can survive in a situation, how you can make the most out of what you get, and also of course the adventure, the call for the sea. And actually, if you look at Robinson Crusoe's first translation, there was this father figure. We all know in the real in Defoe's work also, a father who kind of tries his son. Tries to convince his son not to go to the sea. He defies his father and answers the call, and he goes to the sea. So you see, there is this conflict between the father and the son, and he disregards his father. And throughout this first translation, he's repenting the fact that he did not listen to his father, and therefore all the unfortunate thing that happens to him is because of his not because it's a kind of punishment for a son who does not listen to his father. But once he goes to the island, he realizes this. This realization is important actually. So all these struggles that he goes through are a part of his own learning, and in a way, this can also be a message to the young children who were reading his life. So that way, so you can read of it as a biography also.
Yeah, thanks. We have one question. This is coming from a historian, Tripti Dev, my friend, the historian, has a question. Have you looked at any of the historical travelers' accounts? Have their translations done justice to the original account? Uh, have their experiences been affected by the biases of the translators?
The original travel accounts, like the real travel accounts. See, I have not looked at. I haven't actually found translations of the real travel accounts. Although I mentioned people reading Livingstone and Stanley, but I am not very sure if they were reading it in those in translation, because I haven't found translations. What I have found is that they were writings on the lives of these men. So there is no way I can compare the original works produced by this people with the kind of with translate, because I did not find them. I haven't seen them. What I have seen mostly is a mention of them. That the authors say that, like Vibhuti Bhushan mentions that I have never been to Africa. He has never been to. He has never stepped out of his own country. But the kind of vivid description of the African land that he presents is basically from his reading of Livingstone and Stanley and Johnston. So that is how he mentioned, but I did not come across any translations as such of such writings. But yes, so that's a very interesting question. If at all it would happen, it's a very study.
Right. Thanks for again answering that question, Saswati. I just wanted to ask one, and this will be the last, I promise. No more questions from me, please.
No, no, fine.
What is, yeah. So, what happens to pilgrim narratives? I mean, do we see any influence of these Western literary works on pilgrim narratives in any way, or do we see any surge in their
Uh,
publication?
See, pilgrim narratives did exist from a long time. From 1775 onwards, there were writings on places that people have been traveling to, and because there was no restriction on traveling within the country. They could. The restriction was only on taking undertaking sea voyages. And interestingly, Shashwat, that Bengalis were fascinated by Puri. They wanted to. They had been visiting Puri for a long time, and one of the objections against undertaking sea voyages was that they would have to get on a ship which was built by a British person or a Muslim, and they will have to sit on leave with people of other castes and communities for a long time, which might lead to impurity of food and all of that. So these were the major restrictions. Okay, but when people undertook sea voyages to come to Puri, there was no restriction and there was no problem with that. So that was allowed. Well, your question, as you're saying, that whether there was any influence or not, I'm sorry, I have no idea. Actually, I have read a few which were written way before, and they were, of course, written in a very indigenous manner. Later on, when, of course, prominent travel writers were writing about their experiences within the country or traveling to the Himalayan regions or North India. Of course, there were influences. There was journal keeping, which is one of the major influences, of course, detailed study of the places, interaction with the communities. Yes, but I have not studied it that way, so I can tell you the features that were there, but cannot give my own opinion about it because that is something that I have not studied in specifically.
All right. Thank you so much, Sashwati, for that wonderful talk, that enriching talk, and thanks for answering all the questions, responding to the comments. It was great having you as our speaker for today's lecture. Thank you so much, and I would also like to thank our audience who joined us today and listened and stayed with us through the entire session.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Shashwat, for having me, and thank you to the audience for listening so patiently to what I was saying. Thanks for being such patient listeners. Although I could not see them, but I'm thankful to them. And thanks to Shashwat for being so kind. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be back soon with more of such engaging sessions. Thank you once again. Goodbye.
Thank you.